Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us this evening for our event, Intergenerational Climate Feminism, 4 Stories. This event is part of York's Women's Week 2022, slightly belatedly, and it's on their theme of climate feminism. There's still events happening until May, so I'd really recommend going and seeing what else is on in the programme. And we'll also share a link to the website in the chat. So I'm sure we're going to have a really interesting conversation this evening with all our speakers. But before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to express solidarity with the people of Ukraine and people around the world experiencing conflict and fighting oppression. So we're joined tonight by 4 brilliant women to talk about intergenerational climate feminism: Safar Sharif, Sonya Peres, Grace Smith, Kate Locke, and Sonia Woodcock, and they're going to tell you about their personal journeys to working in the environmental sector and environmental activism. And then we'll have a discussion and Q&A session. So please do post any questions for the speakers in the Q&A or the chat. I also just wanted to say that in the bottom menu bar, you'll see like a CC live transcript button. So if you want to add subtitles, you can do. So you can just press on that. So you can either choose to show or hide the subtitles. But anyway, so I think we're just going to get started with the event. And the first person who's going to talk is Sonya Peres. So Sonya, would you like to? Yes. Hi. Thanks.
Can you see and hear me?
Yes, looks great. I'm going to just let you take it away. And yeah.
Thanks, Rosanna. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us today. I'm really excited to hear the other speakers and have some really interesting discussions. So my name is Sonya Peres and my pronouns are she, her. I'm based in Glasgow, although I grew up in Canada, particularly in Toronto. And if you're Canadian, I actually grew up outside of Toronto in Oakville, Ontario. And I studied in Montreal, so I lived in Montreal for quite a few years. I'm a member of Edinburgh alongside Rosanna, Nishta, Alice, and Fiona. So really delighted to be a part of such a lovely collective. I work as a project manager for Students Organising for Sustainability, and we are an educational charity that was developed by the National Union of Students, essentially to support students and learners to lead on sustainability and climate action, and to work with academics and professional staff in universities and colleges and everywhere to be able to support students to lead on sustainability. But I'm here today in a personal capacity and to represent Edinburgh as well. So a lot of my work focuses on the role of education in not just tackling the climate crisis, but in achieving climate justice. So I specifically work to embed climate education in everything that's taught and learned, in formal education and also in informal education. So some of my areas of work include working with UK governments to embed sustainability in primary and secondary curricula via a campaign called Teach the Future, as well as supporting academics and professional staff in universities and colleges to work with students to progress a pedagogical process called Education for Sustainable Development, which is a type of learning that supports students to be able to contribute to a better future. And I do this through a range of programs, campaigns, and consultancy work. And a lot of my work involves exploring what decolonizing and decarbonizing education systems look like with staff and students, and how decolonizing and decarbonizing education can contribute to the systems change that is so desperately needed for a better future. And so in my work and just in my day-to-day life, I'm just so moved and empowered by the determination of young people and the wider student movement, and just the unwavering belief within the student movement that a better world is possible. But I also have to add that I've worked with many students who don't want to impact, like they don't want to necessarily inspire others and to have others be so moved. They simply just want to, have a better future and live in a better world. And they want to essentially not be activists because they want the climate crisis to be solved, essentially. So I didn't really grow up thinking that I would do any of this work. Until I was about 12, I wanted to be a pop star. My first ever email address was popstarsonya@hotmail.com, which I think really shows my dedication. And as I got older and I very incorrectly started thinking pop music was uncool, I wanted to be an alt rock star. And then I wanted to be a writer. So I really didn't ever think that I would end up working in sustainability. And I think part of this is because for so much of my childhood and so much growing up, so much of my time spent growing up, I thought that the climate crisis was about the environment and about nature. And I didn't really grow up with much of a connection to nature. I'm from a pretty big urban area in Canada. And this comes as a shock to a lot of people that I didn't grow up with that connection to nature, because of course Canada is such a beautiful country. So I immigrated to Canada when I was 6, and connecting with nature just always felt like something like white Canadians did, which is obviously not true considering the relationship many Indigenous cultures have with nature. But I just mean to say that it felt a bit out of reach to me, and it felt like something I didn't really know how to do compared to my white friends. And so I think that's part of the reason why I never really thought I would ever work in this kind of field. So I started thinking more about social injustice, racism, anti-Blackness, colorism, classism, imperialism, and colonialism in my late teens, partly because of Tumblr, to be perfectly honest. It's like a wealth of resources on really interesting and important material and topics, but also at university. So I was lucky enough to find a community at university, at McGill University specifically, filled with students who were questioning the status quo, questioning our economic systems that do so much harm, questioning colonialism and imperialism, the occupation of Palestine, capitalism. I found a group of students in a community who believed we could have better and that we deserved better as well. And these students created so many different communities that worked to reduce the harm caused by living in our current society, in a capitalist society. And they, developed so many communities to show love and care for one another. And I really learned so much from those experiences. I also studied history and international development, where I learned a lot about the impacts of colonialism on countries and communities around the world, but also about the power of people coming together and demanding more, demanding better. And that's always happened throughout history, and especially with women as well. So at university, I interned at a charity that works to alleviate student food insecurity, which is where I learned more about the environment, particularly through that food and social justice lens. So it was through these experiences and these interests that I ended up working in sustainability and climate action. I previously didn't really understand the connection between the climate crisis and social injustice, but now I really see, and I wholeheartedly believe, that the climate crisis is completely a social justice issue. So it's the very systems that cause social injustice, poverty, inequality, oppression, systems like capitalism, and specifically racial capitalism, that are causing the climate crisis. And these systems perpetuate one another and cause so much suffering. So working to end poverty, for example, is the same thing as fighting to make our world more sustainable. Working to end white supremacy is the same thing as fighting to make our world more sustainable. Working to dismantle the patriarchy and to end transphobia is working to make our world more sustainable. So I'm now starting to connect more with nature. Living in Scotland is it's like a really lovely place to do that. My partner and I, we get to go for walks. I recently went camping for the first time with Rosanna, and I seek out opportunities to be in nature now. And I'm not afraid if I don't know how to do certain things like camp or Bag of Munro. I just ask, because now I feel like I deserve to have a relationship with nature. And increasingly, as I learn more about nature, I also understand that I am nature and that we're all nature, and that human beings aren't separate from nature, but absolutely a part of nature. And so my care for social justice is increasingly intertwined with my growing connection to my natural environment and to natural landscapes. So I hope to continue this work, to continue, embedding sustainability and climate education into what young people and learners everywhere are exposed to. I also feel like I have a lot of privilege, and I want to use my privilege privilege to be able to advocate for folks who may not feel safe enough to advocate for their own needs. And I want to use my privilege to be an ally to others. I think climate activism, decolonizing work, decarbonizing work, climate feminism, it takes a lot of bravery. And I think my goal is to, as I get older, to increasingly have more courage to speak up for what is right. And I also think I want to increasingly be brave and have more and more bravery to be able to actually experience the discomfort of having to change my lifestyle for the collective good. So I think that's where I started, and where I'd like to go is just braver and more courageous as I go on. So that's me. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Sonia. That was a really inspiring and wonderful start to the evening. And there's lots for us to talk about in that. But we're going to keep moving on before we get to the discussion. And the next person to talk is going to be Kate. Hi, Kate.
No, we're going to try and show my slides. We had a little practice,
yes,
and I had a freak out. So
it's going to be fun.
Let's have a go. Right, Rosanna, tell me you can see the right view.
Looks good. Take it away.
Okay. So yeah, thanks so much, everyone, and that was really fascinating, Sonia. I'm so pleased we're doing this event because I'm learning already. The whole idea for kind of doing an intergenerational approach is something I'm really keen on. I'm the oldest of the women talking today. I'm in my early 60s now, so my story goes on for a bit, but I'm going to very much give you a condensed version. I think it's really fascinating because I think my journey has been kind of the opposite way to Sonia's by the sound of it. But anyway, I will give you a little bit of what I've learned so far and some sort of some top tips from me. I thought main key points that are things that I think are things that I've learned. So right, so this is what I do now. So I won't go into a lot of detail on this, but I now work at the University of Leeds, and I've worked there since end of 2015, so 2016. And I used to work at the Priestley International Centre for Climate, and I now work on a project called the Place-Based Climate Action Network. My job is in communications, so my job title now is Policy and Communications Manager. And my work kind of goes across the place-based means local climate action, as simple as that. A strong part of what we do with PCAN, as the acronym is we have these things called climate commissions, and these are really kind of experiment in a new form of governance. They bring together people from the public sector, the private sector, and the third sector on a totally sort of voluntary basis. To help kind of drive climate action forwards in the places where we live. The first climate commission to start was the Leeds one, which started in 2017, and that picture is a picture of the launch event at Leeds City Museum, and I think we had about 300 people there. We were at capacity. There was a huge amount of interest in it. Since then, loads more commissions have started. We started 2 other core ones in Belfast and Edinburgh. And Rosanna, our chair tonight, and Alice, who's in the background, both part of the Edinburgh Climate Commission. The latest commission that we're doing, we started last year, was the Yorkshire and Humber Climate Commission. So that's a regional climate commission, which is a really big enterprise. So I work in communications on that. I also sit on the communities and engagement panel. It's a thoroughly exciting and absorbing and really challenging area to work in, and I love it. But that's where I am now. But this is how it started. Some of you will know that's a very young David Attenborough there. So when I started off back when I was 17, 18, I wanted to be a female version of David Attenborough. I was completely inspired by Life on Earth. Again, some people will remember that. That was one of the sort of early series he did. It was either him or Gerald Durrell, who, if you know his books, My Family and Other Animals, was a really formative book for me. So it was nature and conservation that got me into this. And in fact, I even went to work at Gerald Durrell Zoo on Jersey for a few months. I managed to let the tapirs out, but they never knew it was me. I never told them. That didn't last very long. That was just an interim job. And the plan was to become an ecologist. To do that, I had to go to university, I thought, and get a degree and become an ecologist. But there was a really severe issue with that, in that I'm really rubbish at maths. And I couldn't even use a scientific calculator. And as a result of being so rubbish at maths, it was clear that I wasn't going to be able to do what was needed to become an ecologist at that stage. So I ended up switching courses and becoming a philosopher instead, which it's great philosophy, but it's not sort of, a career for. Anyway, this is what happened instead. I got into journalism and started on local papers. I ended up working for Radio Times and interviewing lots of celebs and things like that. And that led to me writing books, mostly sometimes not under my own name or pretending to be somebody else. There were a lot of novelizations, too many books on EastEnders to count, including Tiffany's Secret Diary, which was a bestseller for all of a week. So it was a move away from everything that I'd wanted to do at the start into kind of glossy, sort of celeb-driven kind of. It was great fun, but it wasn't, where I planned to go originally. I also wrote a memoir as well called Carrying Kisses. Anyway, we won't go into that one. But as a result of my being an author and a journalist, I also ended up writing a column in the local paper here in York, where I live, the York Press. And that column was the start of a change for me. I was challenged to do something on composting, and I ended up, as you can see there with my compost bin, becoming a huge fan of it. And that kind of set me on a journey to a lot of other changes. You can't, once you've got compost, you've got to do something with it. So, you've got to grow things with it. So there, I had never, grown vegetables before. So there's me with my carrots doing that. That's a picture of our MP, Hugh Bailey, and you might recognise that person in the background, a young Ed Miliband who was looking at my compost. So I wrote about going green, and it was in a newspaper column. And then as a result of that, I wrote a book about going green, which is called Confessions of an Eco Shopper. When I started to do lots and lots of crazy things and write about them for the book. And it did lead to lots of genuine lifestyle changes, some of which you can see here, but included things eventually like getting rid of our car and not flying and changing my diet and lots of other things, but kind of, personal changes and things that were important to me. But my emphasis at that time was kind of more on personal change, I would say, obviously with a book called Confessions of an Eco Shopper. But then it extended out into working with communities. And that's a group that we started in York called Planet South Bank, which is my local area of York. And that's a community garden there that we run on behalf of the church. There was a project that I then got asked to get involved with the Stockholm Environment Institute at the University of York called the Good Life Initiative. And that was a big community project that we worked on for 2 years. And that's Planet South Bank there, talking to people about their carbon footprints and using real pie as an incentive to talk about pie charts and percentage of carbon emissions. You do what you can. And we did all sorts of wonderful things, like particularly in the New Earswick project. And one of the things I'm kind of really the proudest of is working with that community and turning an area that was basically, it used to be a tip. It was green, but there wasn't, trees around the edges, but nothing in the middle. And as part of that project, we planted a woodland, and that's the start there. And by 2019, it was like that. And I hope it's better and even more lush now. But okay, that was a real practical difference that involved working with the whole community. It was a lovely thing to do, and it's kind of had a lasting legacy. And also I got involved with activism, as you can see here. With a friend, we started a petition to world leaders from Yorkshire, and we took it to Paris and to the COP21 in Paris, and met lots of people and put our case there. there's just an example of a range of things that I've been involved with. That's my daughter in the top right-hand corner, and that was one of the Love Of campaigns. And you know, she was the person I dedicated my book to. She and all kind of young people, and she is the reason I do what I do. So anyway, all of that stuff, but I realized that I wasn't going to get any further until I'd really got a qualification that sort of proved I knew my stuff on science. I was kind of going to be an enthusiastic amateur unless I actually got a qualification. So I did go back to university in my mid-50s to the University of Leeds. I studied sustainability, specializing in environmental politics and policy. I did have to do some maths. It was very hard. I actually cried in one of the tutorials, which was very embarrassing for everybody, but that was the low point. I got through it and I got my degree, and as a result of that, I then managed to get a job marrying up the two things that I was really passionate about, which was climate action and communications, by getting a job at the university and doing what I do now. So I mentioned Yorkshire and Humber. We're working now on an action plan for the region, and we're, you know, that's all starting to happen now, and that's fantastic. In Leeds, one of the things that I think I'm most proud of is that we did a climate change citizens jury. It was one of the first citizens juries. Learned so much from doing that. Fantastic bunch of people to work with, to be involved with. And yeah, I think it was another sort of formative time. And just the other part of my job is I also work with some of the world's top climate researchers for the UK Climate Resilience Programme. And again, that's on the comms side, but climate resilience, climate adaptation is another side that perhaps doesn't get talked about enough. So that's another comms job that I find it's a good complement to what I'm doing now. So I wanted to ask just how does this relate to climate feminism? And I've been doing a bit of research, and I'm very keen on the work of Project Drawdown. And I think this quote here about gender equity is a key answer to the planetary challenge, and that empowering and educating women and girls are among the most significant and impactful actions that we can take to tackle climate change. And Catherine Wilkinson, who did a fantastic TED Talk in 2018 and is the co-editor of a book called All We Can Save, which is a collection of essays and poems. She's a good quote from her there about gender and climate are inextricably linked, and drawing down emissions depends on us rising up. And I think that's just so important. And it's made me reflect that in my own work, women are still underrepresented across our platforms. We're still having to actively strive for gender balance. It doesn't occur naturally, necessarily. Diversity and inclusion needs to be a hell of a lot better. And while young people's voices are now being listened to and included, this should have happened a lot sooner. So, you know, lessons for me to learn about climate feminism relates to what I do now. There's still much to be done about where we live right now. So just finally, my top tips, and we're happy to kind of go into this more at the Q&A at the end. I think my own journey shows that you need to follow your passion. Catherine Wilkinson says, find your superpower. I do firmly believe if you let your heart lead you, you will find what you want to do. Sonya mentioned being brave, and she's absolutely right. And you can't, don't be afraid of taking big or scary steps. Going back to university in my mid-50s and doing a master's degree was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life, but it was so worth it, and I got so much from it. But I said, don't sweat the small stuff. Unless you're rich and you have a massive carbon footprint. Really, at the end of the day, if you're living a normal life, it's not what you're doing that really, really matters. Again, as Sonya said, it's system change that is absolutely the most important thing. And the not guilt tripping and shaming people is, life is too short for that. But also don't ignore the personal, because while personal action in itself is small, it is cumulative. It will guide and shape you, and also you will be an example to others through your choices, how you live your life and what you do. Because she talked about, together we're an ecosystem. I think that's completely true. So it's what think about what you've got to give, you know, you don't have to do the same as other people. So it's your unique talents and skills. But the main things for me are talk about it to other people, to vote and be politically active, to get involved, definitely to protest. Let me see. Stop sharing. There.
Thank you so much, Kate. That was great. I promise it wasn't the main takeaway from that amazing talk, but I can't believe you wrote books on EastEnders. That's amazing.
I was Grant Mitchell. Yeah.
Because you never know everything about your colleagues, because we worked together for like 2.5 years. But thank you. So our next speaker is also called Sonya. Shall I let you? Are you ready to?
Certainly.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you very much. Wow, where does one begin after those first two presentations? I knew we were going to be in for a good evening with the group of speakers here, and it's certainly proving this way. So my name is Sonya Woodcock, and I'm the coordinator of Foodwise Leeds, which is the local food partnership for the city. And we're, as a food partnership, we're a member of the Sustainable Food Network, Food Places Network, which is a national network across the UK, all working for systems change, specifically in and around food. So it's an interesting and exciting role because there's a lot of partnership work that has to take place, and you know, we're working at how food is produced, how food is accessed, businesses, and also then how food is disposed of as well. So there's very much a climate role in there when we're looking at all aspects of food. And we're in an interesting space right now because I'm working very closely with Leeds City Council, who is one of the partners within the partnership, and we're setting on the path of developing a food strategy for the city of Leeds. And that's what we'll be working on this year. We haven't had a food strategy since 2010, and it's something we've been asking for a long time. So it just feels like the planets are sort of aligning at the moment, and people are starting to, see the benefits and the need. And a lot of it, this has come from through COVID and the lockdown, where the council has had to take a role in food. And so it's great. So we can start pushing at all these different angles and get a strategy that will work for everybody in the city. So my journey is a little bit different from everybody else's. I'm also a Canadian, but I come from the west coast of Canada on Vancouver Island. And like Sonya, I also emigrated there at the age of 6. So there are some similarities. But I'd like to say probably my role, I started in activism. I was born on a farm in the UK, and then we immigrated to Canada. We moved to the prairies, and we lived on a big, quarter section, so 160 acres. But my parents didn't farm it. They lent it out to or rented it out to other people to run cattle and grow grain on it. And then after a while, after a few years, 5 years, we then moved to Vancouver Island, and eventually to Victoria, which is the capital city of British Columbia. So it's the seat of the local, or the seat of the provincial government. So I've grown up with a culture of demonstration, because there was often, marches through the streets of Victoria. From a young teenager, I was involved with like the annual Peace March, and all sorts of environmental demonstrations as well, because British Columbia has had a long history of protests, particularly around forestry and the clear cutting of the forest, the old growth rainforests. So I got involved with that as well, and I've sat on the logging roads and tried to stop the loggers coming in, and all aspects of that. After high school, I also had a role with Greenpeace for a bit. Greenpeace was originally started in Vancouver back in the 70s. So that, this has been, it's a strong seat of environmental activism on the west coast of Canada. After high school, I wanted to go off and see the world. So off I went, spent time in Europe. And then I spent quite a number of years in Asia, and just, really traveling deeply into lots of really different places, seeing and being part of engaging with a lot of different cultures and really seeing different perspectives, seeing the poverty, seeing the fantastic rich cultures, seeing the beautiful, different, biodiverse environmental areas, also seeing devastation as well. I went out to Sarawak to see the cutting of the rainforest down there, and it was part of Borneo. So just really, seeing a lot of different things. I went to university as a mature student, so I went back to Canada and I did my undergrad in Asian studies, and which was absolutely fascinating. There's a lot of East Asian culture, like a big East Asian influence on the west coast of Canada. And on completing my undergrad, I then went and spent 4 years in Beijing. I went first as a student and studied for a year, and then spent 3 years selling my soul a bit, actually. I ended up working in financial services, which seemed a little bit odd, but it was good as well. Within that role, I did get disillusioned because actually, our clients were like Shell and people like that. And so I started doing some sort of CSR for the company, and anybody that we worked very closely with an organization that was working to educate girls out in the far west of China. So I did find a bit more meaning within my work. I left China, things moved on. Eventually, I found myself in Leeds, and I was working in the third sector, working for an organization, so very much working with communities. And it wasn't that long after the birth of my first daughter that the whole school dinner thing here blew up. And it just really struck a chord with me. I just had these strong images of people stuffing chips through the fence to the children on the other side. And I thought, I've had a plant-based diet pretty much my entire life. I come from like the hippie West Coast. I've grown up with like a wholesome food diet, originally from, a farm. I understand food. And I thought that that's an area that I can actually concentrate my interests, my knowledge and experience and pursue this and help to bring about change. So I did two things. First of all, I started working for an organization in west of Leeds and doing healthy cooking classes for communities. And I also started a master's degree down at City University at the Center for Food Policy. So I did a distance master's degree in food policy because Leeds didn't have one at the time, unfortunately. And, that was really fascinating, studying with, really interesting people, really learning about the food system and about the changes that needed to be made from every aspect. And in addition to that, I also started volunteering with Feed Leeds, which is a food growing network for the city, and meeting other activists who shared, similar thoughts and ideas. And this is when we started pushing Leeds City Council. So this is back in about 2014, 2015, about the food strategy and why there wasn't one for the city and why we needed that. And eventually out of that, Sustainable Food Cities at the time, they ended up having a funding round to start supporting coordinators for food partnerships. And Feed Leeds, we then formed as the Leeds Food Partnership. We separated from Feed Leeds and became the Leeds Food Partnership and applied for that funding and got support through the University of Leeds and then through the council to set up as a food partnership. So it's been a bit of a different journey then. And it's great. And I just want to say, like, something that's throughout my whole journey, other than probably doing my master's, there was really great women and women leaders, all the way back in, the very early environmental movements, on the logging road, that was a feminist peace camp up in Clayoquot Sound. just always really worked with, really great women who had this vision, also intergenerational at all as well. City at the time was all male profs. And I find here now within my work in Leeds, there's lots of great women involved and some great men as well. But there's a bit of shift, a bit of change at the moment, and people are wanting to work together, work collaboratively, which is really important, because the only way we're going to bring about change is not having this constant competition, but working together in partnerships to support each other, to look for ways of doing things differently, and bringing about that essential change, while also continuing to protest, to be heard, to keep asking and pushing, and just working to bring about that change. And I think, like Kate as well, as a parent, I've got 2 daughters now, and I just really want to ensure that, they've got a world to grow up in, and a world that's good, and they have the opportunities, that I've enjoyed and experienced. And I just feel it's important to bring as many people as we can along on this journey, and always remembering that it's, those who are most disadvantaged will suffer the most. And so we're always at the forefront. It's about, as we're doing the work in Leeds, it's about having a sustainable, healthy and fair food system. So just making sure that everybody has access, and that's people here in Leeds, but also thinking about the whole food system and about where food is being produced, and ensuring that we're not perpetuating the negative aspects of it, and just trying to bring about a better, stronger, healthier food system for everybody. I think I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sonia. I'm really passionate about sustainable food systems, so I'm delighted that you're here and we can talk more about that as well. So our next speaker is Safar. Would you like to tell you? Oh, hello. Perfect. Again, sorry, I know I'm switching very quickly between you all. It's just, I don't want to talk too much. I want to let you guys talk. So I'll let you take it away as well.
Thank you. Hi, so my name is Safa and I am 17. So compared to the last few speakers, I don't really have a job that I can tell you that I'm doing, but instead I volunteer with the British Youth Council, and they have lots of different groups like the Yorkshire and Humber Youth Work Unit that lead into different boards like the Regional Youth Climate Assembly. So I am part of the Regional Youth Climate Assembly, and we meet often, and we are young people from Yorkshire and Humber that just decided, you know what, we need to do more about climate change. We wanted to work as a region because we thought, you get more power that way. We could actually get something out of this and make a change. So we started in April 2020 during the pandemic, and we've been meeting online most of the time. We've probably met in person maybe 4 times now, but it was online the whole time. And we finally met up with some young people from South Africa, and we started to work on a project called the Ripple Effect. And then we got to work with people from Leeds University. We worked with the young people from South Africa. And after creating this project with lots of meetings at like really weird times, so we could fit in with the time differences, we presented this project at COP26. And that's definitely the biggest thing we've done, but that's not the only thing we've done. So we presented that, which gave us so many opportunities to network with other people that were at COP26 as well. And it was just a fantastic experience to just, hear other people's experiences as well, and be like, oh, that's what happens to you. And you got to learn so much. Like, even though I'm interested in climate change and the environment, that doesn't mean I know everything, not at all. So it was great to just learn more. With the Regional Youth Climate Assembly, we've also worked on the Yorkshire and Humber Climate Change Commission that Kate mentioned earlier. So we are now a commissioner on that. We've also worked with IPPR and IPPR North. We've also worked with so many other companies as well. And we've done manifestos. And then personally, I've done work aside from the Regional Youth Climate Assembly. So I started getting interested in politics in year 7, and I'm now in year 12. So I started listening to the news. That's literally how I got into it. I wasn't that bothered about nature like Sonya mentioned. I never cared much about it. I wasn't exactly the person who needed to be outside or anything. But then I started watching the news and I got into what was happening around the world and I wanted to learn more. And then I got involved in the youth council, Barnsley Youth Council. I got on that and I heard about the issues young people thought were important, and climate change came up. So then I did a bit of research into it and I thought, you know what, I'm agreeing with all these points. I'm agreeing that we need to be buying food locally, that we need to be cutting down on our carbon emissions from heating, we need to be walking instead of using cars. And I'm agreeing with all of these. So I just got really passionate and I really wanted to go for it. So I got involved. I started meeting councillors. I had scrutiny panel meetings. I created a climate education pack for my schools because I thought even teachers need awareness as well as the students. And I just continued. And I think the most important, the reason I really want to do it, particularly in the eyes of feminism, is I want other young people, females as well, to look up and be like, oh, that's an older girl who's, you know, like really pushing for something they're passionate about. I can do that too. Because I remember I used to be like, it would always be the boys that were in charge. From a young age, it'd always be the boys that were picked as the team leaders. And I wanted to change that. And I think it's already happening now, because on our youth council, you have these two people that are called member of youth parliament. And just last week, we had 2 females voted on. And I know now it becomes less and less that I'm in a meeting and I'm the only girl. And that has happened before, where you're just there with other old men and you just kind of saying, I think this should change, but they don't really take you seriously. And now I'm getting other women in there too, which I really enjoy to see. But yeah, so that I've not got long, so I just wanted to highlight what I've done and why I've done it and the importance. And I'm very happy that you all want to do more as well, and you're all working towards pushing things to do with everything you care about. And I really love what's happening. So that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You're making me feel like I was just the laziest person ever at school. And I also really liked how I think so much in the environmental movement, climate change and the environmental movement have been sometimes conflated with conservation. And this isn't to say that conservation isn't important, but, you know, climate change is political. It's not just about nature. And I think you summed that up so beautifully. Okay, so last but not least, we have Grace.
Hi.
Hello. Okay, yeah, I'll let you say your piece and then we can go into a discussion. And I just wanted to say really quickly, if you have questions for any of the speakers, or you just have a question you want to ask generally, please do put it in the chat or the Q&A. But anyway, yeah, off you go, Grace.
Hi, I'm Grace. I'm involved with the Calderdale Youth Council, and I'm 16, so I don't have many work experience, but I'm in my first year of college studying English literature, sociology and ethics and philosophy, and I think I chose those subjects because of the sorry, but I think that's why I'm interested in those subjects mostly. And I think that I'm interested in mostly about how society is built around the physicality of climate change, because our society is originally based on the foundations of a patriarchal system engrossed with white supremacy, racism and capitalism. And so, like most crises, we are seeing a repetitive pattern in not just inequality, but a sacrifice to our identities and to our human rights. Coronavirus over the last couple of years has placed minority ethnic communities at a forefront to suffer. It has been with women suffering economically more than men, while domestic abuse increases. It has been, these rules apply to you, but with some exceptions to us and a few of them. And with the Paris Agreement deadline increasing and seeping through for a climate neutral world, the climate crisis has taken a turn in the same direction. But what I mean to a sacrifice in our own identities is coming personally from me and my experience of living through school. because the education system has been the majority of my life, and we see so many young people nowadays eager to make a change and that have a desire to have a safe and improved future. And education is essentially known as the bridge from our family to work, where we get socialized to work. But the education has a significant impact on how we learn, what we believe, and how we act. And it has this huge influence on generation after generation. And the present education, it's not a fair system to say, and it doesn't teach us about the inequalities of the wider world in as nearly as much depth as it should be. And the freedom that the education is claimed to give us does not recognise always poverty or racism or sexism. It doesn't recognise that we are being taught about A squared plus B squared, but not acknowledging the fact that people are being discriminated for their gender or for what they believe in. And whilst we are seeing an increase in awareness and we're seeing more allies come through and more, there is this kind of stigma around, I think especially in high school, because everyone's trying to fit in and we're not being taught about it that much. We're not seeing as many people stick up or fight for what they believe in, essentially. Because if the education is this bridge between family and work, it's only preparing those lucky enough to escape being oppressed in the wider world. And we must make sure that the climate crisis is not falling absence of talking about the injustice going on. Those left without food or running water or no electricity are not left out of our conversations. And while we're learning in education about the physicalities of what climate change is doing to our planet, we are learning so much as the injustice it is causing. And I think that is why I'm really interested about how society is built around climate change, how it's made to seem like we're all in the same boat. It should be a collective threat to our home, but because of how our society is built on these foundations, it's an injustice matter, it's inequality. And so I think over the last couple of years, I've learned to have more courage and bravery to talk about these things more, because it seemed like such a wide topic that I didn't know much about. Whereas now it's like you learn so much from these webinars and you learn so much from like watching and listening, and it's about gaining that collective knowledge to have the understanding to apply it in the future. I think that's what's influenced me to learn so much and to carry on taking part in things like this. So yeah.
Thanks so much, Grace. I think you really reminded me how I felt at university. I also did sociology, and I remember thinking that everyone at the university should have to do at least 2 modules of sociology, especially all the people studying economics and who wanted to go and work for like JP Morgan and Bank of America. Can all the other speakers turn on their cameras, please? And yeah. Thanks, and thank you so much for your thank you so much for that. That was amazing, and yeah, really inspiring. So we're going to just start the discussion. Yeah, like I said, if anyone has any questions, then please do just post them in the chat or the Q&A. I feel like a lot of you did cover what climate feminism means to you, which was my first question, but I'm trying to think how best to phrase this. Is there anything any of you want to respond to from other people's talks? Or I think a lot of the things I was writing down were like accountability and systems change and inequality and just general, like, how climate change is part of a wider system of oppression, which I think almost all of you mentioned. But yeah, I don't know, do any of you have anything you want to say after hearing everyone else speak? Or you can just unmute yourselves and start talking.
I'll jump in if you like, because one of the things that came through to me quite strongly is the starting points were all different. And so the point where the younger members of this panel have started from, around social injustice, is one that I've come to much later. And I don't know whether that is a generational thing, because that path that, I've described, I am still on. And I would say now, my concerns, it's not that my concern around the environment has lessened, but my interest and passion and my anger around inequality has massively increased. And so, I've kind of always thought I was a feminist, but in the last few years, I've become much, much more sort of passionate about that and engaged in this and kind of across a variety of kind of platforms in what I do. And I think that is just, it is driven by anger at inequality. And so I've come, I guess my observation is that I've come to that quite late, whereas it's a starting point for some of the panelists here. But I'm really glad that I'm here and I'm, still continuing on this journey. It's, opening up new worlds to me, and I'm just learning all the time.
Thank you, Kate. Actually, while you were speaking, I was thinking about how much feminism has changed even, I'm 26, and even how much feminism has changed since I was Sapphire and Grace's age, and how I would have felt, if I was being honest, embarrassed to say that I was a feminist. And I think my understanding of what that word means, but also for so many other people, that it's not, it's about equity, and it's not just about women, it's about non-binary people and trans people and queer people. It's about equality for everybody, and very much moving away from middle-class white feminism, which I think is maybe what we could call the feminism of the previous decades, and smashing the glass ceiling, which is important, but and I feel like today's feminism has much more synergy with the climate crisis and how we need systems change to address the climate crisis. But yeah, does anyone else want to? Yes, Sonia?
I was gonna say, sorry, I think it's like not, it's also, it's like, it's intergenerational, but I think it's also like based on backgrounds, because I'm just thinking like a lot of like the Black Panther activists that were women have been like talking about this for like decades. So I do think a lot of it has to comes from like your lived experience and like what is so personal to you. And I think like white feminism has changed a lot, but I don't think that's true for a lot of like groups of color around the world, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. No, that's really important to recognize. And I think as we're talking about intergenerational climate feminism, it is about the stories that we hear now are so much more, I don't know, and I don't really know where that comes from. I don't know if any of you think about that. Is it the internet, or is it, why do we hear more stories now? And I think, Sonia, do you have anything?
Well, I like was like radicalized on Tumblr, like honestly. Like I have people that literally grew up down the street from me and have like extremely different like political opinions and like view the climate crisis like very differently. So I don't really think it was like where I'm from or my upbringing. I mean, I obviously a lot of my upbringing, because I'm from like a certain culture, but I think like the internet absolutely like really influenced a lot of my thinking, and I think a lot of that's down to luck and just coming across things that are quote unquote good, because I do find like the internet can have completely different outcomes for people as well.
Thanks. Grace and Sapphire, I'm interested to, it's been a really difficult 2 years, obviously, but for you guys, you've been at school and you should be with people your age, and instead you've been at home. It sounds like you've been pretty busy though. But how did you find having the internet there? Did it help with organizing with other young people? And so far you were talking about connecting with people in South Africa, and that just wouldn't have been possible before. And do you think that it's has that been like a powerful tool for you, or?
Yeah, I definitely think it helps. So we got in contact obviously with the people in South Africa, but there were also stuff set up by young people like climate strikes. You just talk about it and we'd be like, right, we're meeting at this place this time. And you'd end up with hundreds of people there. And that just wouldn't have happened before. And I think during the pandemic, people started speaking about climate change more as well, because you started to see a difference. When I go running. So then when I went running outside, because of all the cars that had stopped going to work, I could physically feel a difference when I was breathing in. So you notice differences and then you share them online and other people relate and then you start talking. So I definitely think that's a tool that is really useful. Even with its flaws, it benefits you so much.
Grace, did you want to add anything? Yeah, sorry, I just thought you might be unmuting.
I feel like on more of a day-to-day basis as well during COVID, that the internet opened, I feel like a lot of people found a new route, a new lifestyle. They kind of got to have that time to themselves, if you were lucky enough, of course. And with that privilege comes a lot of understanding and a lot of course, the media was a huge influence and peer groups on the media. And without the media having that help and without the activism that was going on just before lockdown, having an influence on the media, I think that helped a lot during COVID.
Yeah. No, sorry, I don't mean to fixate on the internet. I just think because you all talked about how important protest and activism was, and if we were thinking about it from an intergenerational perspective, it's been this, it's like the worst and the best thing in the world, isn't it, the internet? So, but okay, I'm trying to think. So I was going to ask you all what motivates you to do what you do, and Kate and Sonya, you were both talking about your daughters and wanting to make a better world for them. And yeah, I kind of wanted, and especially because Kate, you really did change career quite significantly. And when did you sort of know that you wanted to do that? And yeah, was there a sort of specific turning point, or was it more of a general,
apart from the composting column,
from the compost,
which is where it all started,
looking a worm in the face?
Yeah, literally, I killed the first lot. Yeah, I think it genuinely was, when you work in climate change, which, okay, I wasn't then, so I guess this isn't the right answer, but you're kind of constantly thinking about the future and you're modeling the future and, projecting and all the rest of it. But I guess I'd started to obviously think about that through the columns and things I was writing. So I think because as a journalist, I find the best, and my style of writing was always to do something and write about it, to share the real experience of that, kind of warts and all. And so, it's not just a question of reviewing something, it's doing it and sharing the doing of it. And so for me, the book, I'm not flogging it, you can't get it anymore, but
we'll organise a reprint.
Because I did crazy things in the book, and not all of them were around climate change at all. I mean, what was interesting is I started this book before the Climate Change Act hadn't actually been passed at that point. But yeah, I'm so old. But yeah, in doing things and doing this repeatedly, you start to form new habits. And also because I couldn't kind of wimp out of them, because I'd made this commitment to covering all these chapters of my book, so they were planned. So I had to do them. I never got around to volume 2 because my agent said, if you do another book on the environment, I'm going to dump you. So and that was because then the time changed. I mean, 2007, 2008, it was just before the big financial crash. Just as the book came out, it was very much no one wanted to know about green stuff anymore. It was how much you can get, like it is now. Cost of living crisis, massive. But anyway, that's what happened with that book. But I mean, by then the changes were embedded in me, and once you start down that path, you don't want to you can't stop, you carry on. But yeah, my daughter was quite young at the time, and yeah, just a massive sense of sort of feeling of responsibility that you know she and her generation, and all of you younger people are inheriting this mess, and it does, you're quite right, come out of capitalism. It absolutely does, and I see that now so much more clearly than I did then. So now I just want to try and change every aspect. But it was it was a passionate feeling of wanting to make a better world for my daughter. That was the kind of the starting point, I guess.
Thank you. And Sonya, what about for you? Because you were talking about feeling very disillusioned working in financial services, and was it after that and you started in CSR and?
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess always, like I've always, that's what I've always wanted to do. And I think, when I did my undergraduate degree, like I was 26 when I started my undergraduate degree. So, I didn't set out to go and work in financial services by any stretch of the imagination. I was much more motivated to do, things around social justice. But I was living in China and my grant ran out. And I'd wanted to, I'd applied for internships with the UN out there, and just nothing came through. And it was like, so I started teaching English, and then just sort of fell into this other role. And there was good things about it. There was some really good things about it, but it just, it didn't sit right at the end of the day. And I knew it wasn't something that I wanted to do, long term. So I had to find the best of it while I was there, then while trying to sort of recreate myself. And it was very interesting. When I left China, I went back to Vancouver, like none of my skills, none of my experience transferred. And people just weren't interested. And I was like really like a fish out of water. So, I came to, Leeds, within 2 years later, or less than 2 years later. And that was a real opportunity to recreate myself and find something new, because I was new to a new place, and it really had nothing to hold me back, and nothing really to propel me forward either. So it was that opportunity. And I think when you do have children, like it's pivotal. You change, like you've got this other life that you've got to look after, and you want to embed the best of what you've had, and like from your ethics and morals and what have you, and your material experience as well, and share that. And I've always wanted to keep them connected to Canada, so always keep an eye on what's happening in Canada. And it's really changing there, like sort of like around land claims and Indigenous rights. And I have Indigenous family members, so it's sort of you become very, very aware of like this post-colonial world and what's happening, and how we can improve like food sovereignty, which sometimes I think in England you don't really experience that. I think it becomes very rich and very real when you go back home. When I go back home, and I just always want to impart that experience so that they feel it, and they hopefully can make it better. I mean, it's really frightening. Like I see in many ways like the change is much faster in Canada, with like all the wildfires that are happening, and the deforestation that's gone in British Columbia is just, it's awful. But then again, they also, the food work that they're doing around is incredible as well. There's lots of really fantastic, grassroots, community-based, and also like policy-driven work as well, which is, really admirable, and stuff that we'll want to bring over here. So it's, a bit of both worlds, and just, and what Kate said as well around that injustice is just, and the inequality, inequity, and it's just every year it's getting worse and worse. Society's becoming more stratified, and we're not going to get through this unless we sort that out. And that's true, like whether it's here in the UK or in the global South, wherever, it has to be sorted out, addressed.
Thank you. We've had a really great question come through, which was sort of similar to one that I was going to ask. So I thought I'd first ask the first bit of my question, which was, how do you feel that we're working across generations right now on the climate crisis? And I think, you touched on the fact that we're seeing, First Nations people become senators or congressmen in the US and Canada, but mostly I feel like there's one generation that is represented in politics, especially in the UK, and it's certainly not people who are in their 20s or even in their 30s. And I think that, you know, it maybe links to how we're communicating across generations. But anyway, how do you feel that we are communicating and working across generations? And then Josie has asked, how would the panelists build connectivity amongst and between generations? I'm sort of assuming that that's what you mean, Josie. And she said going forward virtually or in real life. So sorry, that was two questions in one. Would anyone like to? Sonya P, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I just have like an interesting sort of experience. So SOS, where I work, was like developed by the National Union of Students. And I'm not sure, maybe Kate, you might be aware because you work in at Leeds University, but like UCU, so the university, the Union for Colleges and Universities has been striking in February and also now in March. And it's because of low wages and cuts to pensions and just really, really poor working conditions. And it's just been really amazing to see the NUS, the National Union of Students, stand in solidarity with the UCU. So it's like students, and of course the student movement isn't just young people, but it's majority young people. And it's a student union movement and just a student movement in general saying, yeah, like we are in solidarity with our professors and our lecturers, and we you know, we want to like fight for their right also to have capacity and to have good like working standards and working environments. I feel like that's such an interesting example of intergenerational solidarity and intergenerational working. And it is a climate justice issue because like labor issues are climate justice issues. And if we think about climate education, like how can professors and lecturers and universities and colleges and schools teach climate education appropriately if they feel overwhelmed and they're not paid properly and they have bad working conditions? So just wanted to highlight that NUS has been like, you know, in strong solidarity with UCU. And I feel like that's such a brilliant example of intergenerational solidarity. And again, it's not like black and white, like there are older students in the student movement, there are younger lecturers and academics at UCU, but it is like, it's just been really nice to see.
Just realised I wasn't unmuted. Thank you, Sonia. Would anyone else like to jump in or respond to what Sonia said?
I'll just say I would like to see more intergenerational work. I mean, I've been really inspired this evening hearing from Safa and Grace and just like how motivated they are, which is absolutely brilliant. At the moment, we're looking to set up a youth board for Bite Back here in Leeds, which is around food, but it's about getting young people involved. So that seems really exciting that, you know, that you guys are so motivated, and, you know, we want to learn from you. I mean, we want to learn how we can to reach more people, more young people, you know, feel that they've got a voice and can really get involved. So yeah, but I also think, you know, the older generation, they have a lot of skills and a lot of knowledge that can be shared as well. So we need to find those ways of bringing people together. And I think we do need more face-to-face events and like experiential opportunities where people can do things beside each other, support each other. I mean, we've just launched in partnership with Feed Leeds today for the spring equinox, a campaign around food growing. So it's called Sow a Row Extra. And it's about those with the skills and the knowledge who can grow food to get it started and then share it with other people who don't know. So that could be intergenerational, it could, you know, be whatever. But it's, I think we need that knowledge transfer in so many ways.
Thank you, Sonia. I think, yeah, it's something that maybe we've all become less good at, is listening and active listening and, you know, leaving your prejudices and your preconceptions behind and just listening to what people say with the knowledge that you can learn from them. And I think, yeah, you summed that up really, really well. Safa and Grace, do either of you want to, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I haven't got much on that, but I've been looking at a question in the Q&A from Ben. I'd just like to mention that a few things that I like to do with students. Obviously, I speak to young people usually when I'm speaking about climate change, if I'm not, you know, yelling at counsellors. So we usually I try to immediately highlight something that they probably have experienced, because even if it's not like a flood or a forest fire, not something so dramatic, we all do experience something, even if it's really small. So I go through basic things and just small differences in their lives that they may have not noticed. And I say, well, that's actually an effect of climate change, and that's why that's happening. It could even be economically, why, you know, some things cost more or something. I just make things clear like that. That way they know, oh, I am impacted then. And that immediately engages them into the rest of the conversation, because they're like, this is affecting me too. I kind of want to listen. And then I always try to finish whatever I'm saying by leaving them with some simple things they can change in their day-to-day life. Especially for young people, you're not going to tell them to change the gas company they use, because that's not up to them. So I always try to just say, right, if you're going to go to the shop after school, look what you're buying, look at where it's coming from. Because that's something you can just easily stop. You can be like, you know what, I don't need that, I'll just not buy it. Maybe I'll buy this apple that's actually from down the road instead of like from Egypt or something. So I try to make them see these small changes they can make in their day-to-day life, rather than pushing on them saying you need to like walk everywhere because their dad's driving them to school. If they say no, their dad might yell at them. It's not up to them all the time. So just, they're the two big things I think are important, especially when you're speaking to young people.
Thank you so much. That was a question from Ben in the Q&A about tips and experiences for engaging people in climate justice. So thank you so much. And we had another really great question in the Q&A from Anne, and she said, I'm struck by how all of you have mentioned bravery, inspiring. Would anyone like to say a bit more about their edges of bravery? And I was actually going to ask Grace to speak about this first, because you said so well that people at school, they aren't aware of injustice because they aren't being taught about it, but also that people maybe aren't brave enough to say how they feel. Am I saying this right? You know, people wouldn't stand up and say, I care about climate change, I'm a feminist. So do you want to speak about that?
Yeah, I just think in especially high school and a lot, because it isn't coming across as a very like key subject, or as like a really, just because we aren't being taught about it, or we aren't finding this information within the education system as something that's important. A lot of kids don't have resources to go look, and they might be interested in these worldly views and these universal views, like how's it affecting our home, and what climate change is doing, or how feminism is affecting us personally, or how it's going to affect us in the workplace in our futures. But because we aren't learning necessarily this as a essential part of our education, and about how when we enter the world there are going to be these inequalities, it almost comes across as something that's kind of under the radar. So having this like bravery and having this courage to kind of speak up when in my experience, everyone in high school is just trying to like fit in, and they're trying to like find who they are, find their people, if that makes sense. And so like it's kind of hard to speak out against what you believe in, because you're always going to have like that backlash of people who disagree, but because you might not have the resources to look into it fully, or you might not have that experience or that knowledge because we aren't being taught about it, it kind of has that effect, and that backlash of like, it kind of puts you down and maybe like simmers that courage in you, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Do you still find it hard to sometimes speak out, or do you think, are you still good at doing that? I was rubbish at doing that personally, so.
No, yeah, I do find it hard to speak out. I feel like I have a lot of social anxiety around speaking out things that I believe so passionately in, because I love to learn about them and I love to hear other people's views, but sometimes it's almost like that feeling that, like you get with anything you're passionate about, I suppose. But yeah.
Thank you. Do any of you want to respond to that or speak about when you've, what does the bravery mean to you, and have there been moments where you felt scared to speak out? Or
I think for me, bravery is about feeling uncomfortable and being okay with feeling uncomfortable. I feel like we live, and I live a lot of my life avoiding discomfort, but I think to actually take climate action and achieve climate justice, we're all gonna have to give up something and be uncomfortable with something, unlearn something. So I think for me, it's really about being okay with being uncomfortable, because it's for like the collective good.
thank you, Sonya.
I think that's a really interesting and a really powerful point there about being uncomfortable. And I think it rings very true, especially around the social justice aspect of it as well, because often we do have to go into situations and we must go in there listening as well, and not, bringing our privilege in to those sort of situations. And it can be quite uncomfortable. And I think dialogue is changing, like, the vernacular is really changing. And we stumble on our words sometimes, and people can easily get offended because you say the wrong, you may be meaning to say the right thing, but it may not come out. You may not be using the correct, most up-to-date language. And it's about being vulnerable and owning your stuff. But also it's that always wanting to be open and willing to learn, and taking that on board and making your own practice better from it. And I think that's really where the bravery for me comes from.
I think, just to jump in on that, it's kind of I think it's more of a sort of a female trait to feel that, this pressure to fit in, to conform, to actually not necessarily kind of do the things that we've just been talking about. Well, I certainly felt it, and I certainly recognise, what Grace has been saying. So that's kind of another thing that we sort of got to work with as well, is that that kind of imposter syndrome and all the rest of it that's there. I mean, in terms of when I mentioned about being brave, I mean, going back and being a student in my mid-50s and coping with everything that being a modern student, which is so different to when I did my first degree. I mean, you've been talking about the internet. We didn't have the internet when I did my first degree. I mean, it's so there were loads and loads of things that were kind of big challenges for me in that. But I'm thinking about like being brave now. I mean, I think the thing that I feel I should do, and that I don't know whether I can do, is that I would like to get into politics. But I actually am I confess, even though I do quite a lot of speaking out, I'm really afraid of it, and that's because I don't think I'm tough enough, and I think it would, I don't know whether I'd hold up under it. So that would be my next test, I think, because I kind of feel that I ought to, and I should, but maybe I should take my own advice and just carry on doing what I'm doing, because you can't sort of force yourself to go another way necessarily. But yeah, everyone says, and it's really important to use your voice and to speak out. And I would like to get into politics, but yeah, I don't know if I'm brave enough. So that's my edge.
Go for it.
Yeah, I want to see you in politics, Kate. Kate Locke for Prime Minister. Safar, I really want to know what you think about bravery, because you sound like you've been yelling at councillors and you've been holding people accountable. So yeah, what do you think about finding that edge of bravery, and where do you get your courage from?
I've always been quite the confident student, and I don't know why that is. I think it's because the high school I went to, I didn't know anyone. So I just came in all on my own, and it was kind of a chance to, not be the scared kid. You could just be someone, and that was that opportunity, and I kind of took it straight away. And I was like, you know what? No one knows anything about me. I can just say what I want. So I came up with my own opinions, and I was like, yeah, I'll just share them. And if you don't agree with me, I'll argue back at you, and you'll eventually agree with me. And that's how it started. And then obviously I got into the youth council, and the workers I had were fantastic at encouraging you and supporting you. So if I didn't actually understand anything, I could always ask them. And then obviously the first kind of scrutiny panel meeting I had, I was a bit more quiet, and I was like listening to the other people before I actually got engaged. But I started going for it. I started asking questions. I started saying, you know what, I don't think you're actually doing that. You're saying you are, but you're not. And then I learned that my favorite thing is persistence, because that is how you get anything. And I think bravery and persistence kind of link, because you have to be brave enough to not say it once, but say it twice. And then if they don't listen, say it again. And that's how I've definitely developed my bravery, I suppose. I listened and they didn't do anything, so I went for it and I kept going until they actually made a difference. And I'll still go back to people that I know still haven't done anything.
That's brilliant. I feel very encouraged by that.
I think it's the far for Prime Minister, definitely.
Yeah, well, both of you.
Yeah. No.
That's amazing. We have had one question which I think could be a good one to sort of begin wrapping up the conversation, from Alice, and it's again with this theme of bravery. And Alice has asked, what's a time when you were scared to do something but you did it anyway? You can have a moment to think about it. So far, I was going to have to choose from the multiple times she's just held politicians to account on behalf of us all. But yeah, any of you can jump in. I can see you all thinking.
The first time I went for member of youth parliament, which is quite a big role in the youth council. So I just got voted onto youth council. So I was a bit like, you know what, I actually don't really know a lot. But I went for it and I didn't get it, which is fine. Obviously, 12-year-old me was a bit upset, but whatever. And then the person who did get it, they actually dropped out. So I got given the role. And I was definitely thrown into the deep end. I remember our first big conference, they were saying things like motion. I didn't even know what a motion was at the time. I was absolutely bamboozled. I was sat there like, I don't know what you're on about. But I went for it. And then even in the big debate we had, there were like 300 of us, and I could tell they knew more of what they were talking about. But I still stood up and I spoke about climate change. That is the first thing I debated with the 300 NYPs. And I was nervous and I probably stuttered a lot, but I actually went for it and I'm quite happy I did.
That's a brilliant story. Does anyone else want to jump in?
Mine's about public speaking too. And actually, one thing I wanted to say, I sort of gave some kind of tips at the end of my talk, and one thing I didn't say, which I should have said, and I really want to make the point, is I think another important thing to do is to invite others in. Sometimes it's not that people are waiting to be asked, but they don't know until they're asked sometimes what they can do. And one thing I really strive to do now is first of all to kind of sit back and listen and you know, take myself out of the conversation and invite people in, and to give other people the opportunity, particularly younger people. That's something I kind of really strive to do. But just an example of someone inviting me in, which is when I had to be brave, and it was kind of one of my turning points, I suppose, is when I got involved with this project in York, which was I think it was the Green Neighbourhood Challenge. But before then, there's a researcher at York called Gary Hack, who's been my sort of mentor, and he was fantastic. And basically, he asked me to chair a public debate on climate change in a town hall, and I'd never done anything like that before. And I got to know Gary and the other scientists because I basically did one of my eco challenges was to test out whether organic wine made you more drunk than ordinary inorganic wine. That was my entry into science. But anyway, as a result of that, building a friendship with Gary, he asked me to chair this town hall debate, and that was like a really, really massive deal. And I was horrendously nervous, but I got through, and it must have gone okay. And I've done more since, and that's been all right. But public speaking is a big challenging area. But I think being asked and remembering, other people have asked me to do things, and that's made a big difference. So I think it's an important thing now that I try and do, which is bring other people in and step back.
Thank you, Kate. Do any of the other speakers want? You don't have to if you can't think of anything, but yeah, jump in if you have an example. Grace or Sonia, do you want to?
Yeah, I feel like for me, I think when we went into lockdown, before lockdown, I was quite like, I feel like it's quite a feminine trait to like be quite quiet and neat and polite. And through lockdown, I kind of just like took the time to establish my beliefs. And I'd always had these core beliefs and these core traits inside of me. I just never had the time or put the effort in to explore them. And then I feel like it took me some time, but when we got back out after lockdown, I feel like I had that more courage to say what I believe and have those beliefs and public speak about my beliefs and do things like this and just like push the little further each time. That makes sense.
Thank you, that's brilliant.
I mean, just a two-penneth here. I think it's having that conviction of just to keep going, and maybe you're not heard the first time, and it's, you know, maybe it's not that day, that whatever, that situation, that year even, but just, you know, having that core belief. It's like, I'm going to keep saying this. It's eventually going to land on the ears that need to listen. But I do just want to say, I feel like really inspired this evening. And I feel like I've got to like crank it up a bit and take it to the next level, because these young gals coming behind, wow, they're great. They're willing and to speak out. And I think that's really fantastic.
Thank you. I mean, we're almost finished, but I feel like while you were talking there, I felt like it really summed up what climate feminism is. And it's raising your voice, but it's also amplifying other people's voices, and it's taking up space, but making space for other people. And it's talking about injustice and systems change and not being afraid to be too radical or too loud. And yeah, I feel very inspired as well. And it was so amazing to hear all your stories and meet some of you for the first time. And thank you so much for giving up your Monday evening to come and talk to us. And yeah, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much. And yeah, we'll share any links that people mentioned in their talks online tomorrow. I'll send an email to everyone on Eventbrite, and I'll also share people's social media handles if that's all right, because people were asking about how they can find more of your work. But anyway, I will leave it there, and thank you so much, everyone. And thank you everyone for coming, and I hope you have a good rest of your evening. But thanks.
Thank you, and thank you, Rosanna, for chairing and doing a fab job.
Thanks.